Let's talk a little bit about water. So the reality is, right now we're just everybody's kind of posturing over the water sources that we know. And the reality is that for the state of Texas collectively, we've got to do a better job than that. So the first thing really that we need to be focused on is identifying those unused and underused water sources around the state. That includes new water sources. I know the Texas Water Development Board has been working on this for a long time. And I don't know, it's difficult to understand why we can't heighten the awareness around the state of where we are. I read an article just this last week that a study shows that Georgetown has less than 6 years of water supply left. And, you know, you start seeing numbers like that and you go, this ought to be raising more red flags. But I can also tell you that, you know, our electric grid is way behind as well. And I would have thought that Winter Storm Uri would have brought high attention to the need to bring our electric grid back into balance between reliable and intermittent power. And yet here we look up a couple of years later and all of those fears have kind of subsided because we haven't had a real emergency in a couple of years. So one of my jobs, one of my goals is going to be to continue to ring that bell for the rest of the state to understand how high the need is to address water needs. Senator Perry, who I have tremendous respect for, has been working on this issue for more than a dozen years. And I think really has a clear vision of what needs to happen for the state of Texas. So the next thing I think we've got to spend the money to develop those resources that we talked about. Whether that's developing these major or minor brackish aquifers, refining technology for all kinds of brackish water, including seawater, finding new technology that would allow us to use produced water from oil and gas. You know, the numbers that we see down in the oil and gas industry, water has changed significantly as we've gone from a vertical world to producing these wells horizontally. We could be talking as much as 5 billion barrels a day of produced water, high salinity water, but technology is moving that direction, and obviously if we can capture even a portion of that, we have the opportunity to put a lot of new water back into our supply side. And then the last thing that I know folks have looked at for a lot of years, but I think it still warrants at least a little bit of discussion, is are there water sources outside the state that we should consider incorporating into our long-range water plan? In order to do all of those things, it's going to be critical that we have the energy infrastructure to make those projects happen. Desalination, which is used all around the world, is possible if you have enough energy to make those projects work. Obviously, as we advance in technology, the goal will be to reduce those energy requirements. But I think we've got to be open to all forms of energy, just like we've got to be open to all forms of water sources. and that includes nuclear. I think nuclear is going to be a significant energy source moving forward with the advancement of desalinization. And then the last thing, obviously, as we develop these new sources of fluid, we've got to commit the dollars to infrastructure to move that water around the state in the places that need it the most. Those are kind of my thoughts on water. And I can tell you, so in this last legislative session, Senate Bill 28, let me get to my notes on that. Senate Bill 28, which in conjunction with Senate Joint Resolution 75, which passed with over 77% of the voters voting for that, created a $1 billion funding package. And that breaks down in a couple of ways. The bill creates a new water supply for Texas fund for water supply projects that create new water sources for the state. The new water supply for Texas fund, which $250 million of that under Proposition 6 requires a portion of the fund to be used for water infrastructure projects for rural political subdivisions and municipalities of population less than 150,000. You know, one of the things that in my first session as senator for District 31 became very obvious is that most of the rest of the state doesn't really understand a lot of the issues that we have in rural Texas. And water is just another example of that. You know, we've got a third of the state that has plenty of water and so much water that, you know, their big problem is moving water from flood regions. But for the western half of the state, a lot of which is very rural, you know, we've funding water issues is significant. And so one of the challenges is helping those other populations around the state understand that in order for us to have a healthy Texas, they've got to be willing to spend the dollars out here where we're developing food and fiber, and down in the south part of the district, energy, if we're going to continue to provide all of those items that the rest of the state enjoys. Let's see what else of significance. You know, part of that money we see going towards studies for aquifer storage projects, development of infrastructure to transport water so that it's readily available for the new development of water. Senate Bill 30 provided nearly $625 million in additional water project funding for flood infrastructure programs, $125 million for matching funds to be leveraged to leverage an estimated $757 million in federal funds for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund programs. I tell you, with a short amount of time, and I'd like to help you guys get back on schedule, what I'd really like to do is maybe take a few questions from you guys, because realistically what I need to know are what are the things that you guys feel like we need to be focused on as we go into this next legislative session. We're beginning to look at those issues for next session. We'll begin having hearings probably early in the summer, and so I'd love to hear from you guys. I would say this in kind of my closing remarks before we take questions. Water is one of the few issues that we're dealing with that can absolutely be fixed with money. Right? I mean, it's not whether we can do it. You guys know we can absolutely do it if we commit the resources to do it. This last budget session, we had more than a $32 billion surplus. And the numbers are looking good to have a very significant surplus for this next session as well. We need to be good stewards. You know, our forefathers did a really good job of planning for the future when you look at infrastructure for roads and electricity and the other things that allow us all of the amenities that we've grown accustomed to. Water is one of those issues that's not an amenity. It's not a, hey, it'd be great to have water, right? You can go just a couple of days without it. And so, highly critical that we raise the awareness around the state to spend the dollars that's needed in order to secure our long-term water supplies for the state of Texas. So with that, I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you see things coming on the horizon that we need to be looking at, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector?
I've heard on more than one occasion about importing water from other states, pumping it from Mississippi, etc. I'd like to address the concern of the cost, number one, but also what is it the cost to the constituent to be able to consume that water? It's going to cost a lot of money to get it here. There are other options locally that could cost considerably less to preserve water and groundwater and recharge. Why spend the extra money to get it, pump it for a long way? But my biggest concern is obviously the cost to the constituent once they receive that water.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm not saying that that's absolutely the right approach, but I think we need to be looking at all sources. I do believe that, and we've seen the cost for desalinization go down even over the last 10 years. And like I said, if we can come up with energy sources for desalinization, we can continue to bring that cost down along with new technology. So don't misunderstand my comments. I think there are a lot of resources available to us that will be more cost effective on the front end than going outside the state to bring water in from outside sources. But I think we'd be short-sighted to not at least look at those opportunities for the next 50 years for the state of Texas. Yes. Yes. Yeah, well, thank you. So I think public awareness, I think, is really, it's hard to make people pay attention, right? People a lot of times don't pay attention until there's a need, right? And it's critical. But I think we could always do a better job of that. You know, I think you kind of sparked a thought with your question. we have enticed a number of industries even in the last 3 years to come to Texas that my understanding are going to be very large users of water. And I makes me think I probably need to go in and do some research on how those deals were structured when we entice those companies to come here. Um, you know, what you find a lot of times, and this is what happened in Midland, Texas, you find that we don't value that commodity correctly and factor that correctly into the deal terms when we invite somebody like that in. Midland's forefathers did a great job back in the 50s of securing long-term water rights. But they did such a great job that we didn't really pay attention to it. You know, we all watered our yards like crazy and had green lawns, and the water was running out into the gutter, and we didn't worry too much about it because water was cheap until we got into significant drought conditions in the 90s. And by that time, we looked up and realized, wow, we are way behind on the water needs, the going forward water needs of Midland, and therefore had to significantly increase the price to the consumer. And I think a lot of times we may attract those businesses into Texas. We've done it with Bitcoin mining and cheap electricity. You know, in my mind, we don't have cheap electricity to sell here in Texas. But that's something we probably really ought to look at and nail down before we attract more businesses that are going to be high water consumers. So thank you for that. Maybe one more question or statement? Yes. Well, that's another excellent question. You know, the region in general, you know, we struggle all across rural Texas on workforce issues. And so, obviously, a lot of that quality of life out here, we've got to continue to increase quality of life. That means getting more broadband across West Texas. It's going to be health care. You know, as you guys probably know, the legislature this last session designated $159 million for a mental health hospital here in Amarillo. But workforce development is going to be, it's going to be an ongoing issue. I think we can address a lot of that through education. And I think we need to be having those discussions about what does that workforce look like as we're developing what long term is going to be its own industry as far as the water industry. And I think we need to start looking at it in those terms as more of an industry rather than just something that we pump out of the ground. So thank you for that. Well, I want to tell you, I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys today. If you have any questions, I'd love for you or ideas, love for you to reach out to my staff, either here in Amarillo or there in Austin. And if you're in Austin, would love for you to come by and say hi. Thank you, guys.